Hi everyone, so welcome to the final video for psychodynamics. Today we're going to cover individual psychology, also known as Adlerian. So before we begin, again, to kind of paint the scene. So the Freudians understood human behavior and changes of personality through a biological lens at the time of the late 1800s to early 1900s. The Jungians and the analytical psychologists built their foundation of understanding growth and change of one's personality through mythology, religion, spirituality as their foundation. Individual psychology and Adler and the Adlerians are more influenced by social theories of the time during when Adler was practicing. Uh, Also, too, the clientele that these three different schools worked with influenced their theory. So, Freud typically worked mostly with females from a high social class. Jung started out in a psychiatry hospital in Switzerland, and as he went later on in his life, worked with individuals past the age of 50. Adler, on the other hand, he worked mainly with low economic individuals. He had a specialty in working with individuals who were part of traveling circuses, like trapeze artists, etc. And again, really influenced by the social theories, particularly Marxism, socialism, through his wife, who had a lot of connections with the socialist revolution in Russia in the early 1900s. So, with Adler, what we're going to see is the focus on how our personality is developed by our social context when we're born, and really the growth and change is going to occur through relationships and understanding our context in that setting. So, let me share the screen and we'll begin with this. Okay, so individual psychology, also known as Adlerian psychology, named after Alfred Adler. So Adler, like the other two, Freud and Jung, had medical training. Adler was the first to have a falling out with Freud because Adler did not necessarily agree about the strong focus of sexuality. From Adler's view, there's multiple drives of why someone acts and behaves the way they do. And from an Adlerian viewpoint, we view behavior as all being purposeful. Anything we do is working towards some sort of goal. Now, we may be unaware of that goal, but essentially, Adler views people as being motivated to strive for a sense of mastery, acceptance, love, and meaning. And again, those themes are going to come up next module when we talk about humanistic and existential psychology. The problem, though, with striving for mastery, acceptance, love, and meaning is that there is no rule book on how to achieve these goals. So we're not born into this world with a blueprint of how to meet our needs, to get a sense of mastery, and to complete those life tasks. And so the struggle of life is we must learn and develop a path on our own way, hence the individual psychology name. From an early age, we realize by interacting with others that we cannot master everything, and that there always will be people better than us at certain things, and that life is going to throw barriers in our way. And so, in those moments, we can either be destroyed by those barriers, similar to being stuck in the abyss, or we can find a way to achieve our goals. And so, finding a way to achieve our goals can be defined in two categories: useful or useless behavior. And we can connect this to psychoanalysis with the definition of mature and immature defenses. So, a useful manner is trying to achieve my goals in a way that is uh, acceptable not only for myself but for other people. Useless would be in a way that still allows me to achieve my goals, but in a way is detrimental possibly to myself or people around me. So, for example, if we have a child who is acting out, their goal of acting out could be getting love and attention from authority figures or people older than them. but we would define that as useless behavior because rather than getting love and attention from them, it could also add punishment or lack of concern, etc. A more useful way would be building those connections in a non-acting out manner and probably a more social or more mature manner. So many times of our own personality, we are engaging in either useful or useless ways of maintaining certain goals. Okay. So the goals of our life, essentially, Adler defined them in 3 different categories. Now, people after Adler added more categories. There's up to 5, but we're just going to stick with 3 for today. So from an Adlerian view, humans are motivated or driven, it's like a drive, to master 3 spheres of life, aka the life tasks. So our personality is molded in order for us, or at least striving to accomplish these tasks. So the 3 life tasks is love, work, and friendship. So as we can see with this, again, the strong motivation, there's a social component to this. In addition to all of these life tasks can overshadow each other. So in the domain of love, whether it's romantic love or love with family or friends, it's going to take work to build those relationships and to maintain them. In addition to, we can see the friendship domain overshadow love or be connected to love because there can be times we can love friends, or even with partners or romantic partners, there could be a friendship component. Same with work. We want to love the work we do. At least that's one model of meaningful work. In addition to that, in a work setting, we can develop friendships. And finally, in a friendships domain, it's going to take work, and there's also a sense of some form of love with that. So we are driven for all of these ways. Now, again, this was where useful or useless behavior comes into play. If we're not achieving those goals in a useful way, we may find a useless behavior, but it could be more work and more energy because typically useless behaviors impact social relationships in a negative way, either harming ourselves or possibly harming others. So if we go to, all right, so those are the drives or the life tasks is what we're striving to meet. So how we interact and relate with those 3 life tasks is going to be based on, as well as form, our lifestyle. And the lifestyle from an individual psychology term essentially equates to what we've been talking about with the definition of personality. So with this, our lifestyle is going to be broken into essentially not only our behaviors, but how we perceive and as well as our attitudes to things around us. So Adlerian, just for a very quick history lesson, Adlerian psychology laid the groundwork and was very inspirational in promoting cognitive behavioral modalities and inspiring other theorists such as Albert Ellis, who developed rational emotive behavioral therapy. So with this, our lifestyle is going to contain, again, not only just our behaviors, but our attitudes towards ourselves, our attitudes towards others, and our attitudes towards difficulties and barriers. And so what Adler was really interested in is with a term he called private logic. Private logic is essentially how my attitudes are going to be internal, and my attitudes greatly are going to impact what I do. So from a therapeutic standpoint, if I can understand my client's private logic, that makes me help them understand the worldview, and I can also help them expand those attitudes or modify those attitudes if needed. So again, with this, because it's considered a psychodynamic, not only historically because it was developed at the same time as the other 2 we've been talking about, but also there is a focus on the unconscious. But Adlerians keep it very, very simple. There is no model of the psyche. So I'm not going to have a picture of an iceberg, or I'm not going to have a picture of a very complicated map from a Jungian standpoint of what the psyche looks like. Essentially, from an Adlerian viewpoint, any attitudes, thoughts, or ideas, or even being an awareness of our behaviors, if it's out of our consciousness or out of our awareness, that's unconscious. Boom. That's the model for the psyche from an Adlerian view. Anything we're not aware of, that's unconscious. So again, there's still the goal of increasing, making the unconscious conscious is still a strong element of this model. So what happens quite a bit too is we're going to see individuals compensate for their limitations. And in order to reach our goal or the life task that we're striving for, we're going to compensate for any weakness. So you hear the term overcompensation. So if we look at this cartoon, this can be an example of this. Here we have an individual who's shorter in stature compared to everyone else. So how he overcompensates for his physical limitation is by wearing a much taller hat. I'm sure we can think of numerous other examples how people overcompensate for their limitations. Adler was very, very interested in that. Again, coming from a medical model where he began in, he was very interested in especially how individuals who had some sort of limitation physically found ways to overcompensate that by developing talents or interests in other areas to adapt and improve their life. So really, and with this too, because it's a psychodynamic, the big focus of Adlerian is to always promote movement. If we're not having movement, if we're not striving for a life task, we're going to stagnate, and that's going to cause issues with our own lifestyle. Okay. So again, the big theme from Adler is exploring these multiple domains of our physical self and our social self. So Adler really was interested in going further than Freud. Freud typically only focused on the relationships between the parents and the children. That was the classic Oedipal development of the Oedipal complex. And Freud's very fixation was on the relationships between the parents. Adler expanded that. He was more interested in adding how our personality connects to not only our parents, but also our siblings, and the time we are born into this world can have a huge impact on our attitudes, our behaviors, and the life goals we're striving for. And so from this, our lifestyle can be formed from many different perspectives. So it's a more holistic view. So as I already mentioned, our health and appearance is going to impact our personality in some domain. The socioeconomic classes that we're born to or we strive to become or whatever it may be can absolutely have impact on how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive others, and our own goals. Our parental attitudes, again, that's classic kind of Freudian of how our parents' expectations of us can impact our sense of self. Particularly what's unique from Adlerians is this idea of family constellation and birth order. Family constellation, essentially the makeup of the family unit, not only when you're born, but as you develop. And birth order essentially relates to and what stage are you born into? Are you firstborn, secondborn? Are you adopted? Are you the only child? Is there a more integrated family? Do we have different generations living in a house? Whatever it may be. Now, historically, there was specific traits that have gone with firstborns. But as the research has come, there's not a unified agreement on birth order. So let me rephrase that. There's been, traditionally, there was specific traits that were supposed to connect with the birth order of an individual. And there's been a lot of debate on that. But the one thing that has been relevant is rather than putting labels on someone, is exploring their perception of being either firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn, etc. And the thing to remember too is a possibility of why we're going to have different personalities, even though many individuals come from the same genetic pool, is that every time a child is born or added to the family system is going to be different. And So in addition to that, what's interesting from a twins studies perspective is that we know from module 3 that when twins are separated at birth, there can be a great connection in how their personality is displayed compared to if they were raised together. One idea is that parents or caregivers who are raising twins actually are influencing the birth order. There is going to be one twin who is seen as either being a firstborn or the secondborn. There's one twin that's going to be seen as being more healthy or maybe hitting milestones quicker than others. And so one will maybe seem more independent and one may seem less dependent. And what we can see too with the twin personality being developed is sometimes if twins are constantly growing up being compared as being the same person, or maybe people are confusing them with the other, there may be a strive for them to essentially separate psychologically to really distinguish who is different. Maybe one's going to be interested in sports and one's going to be interested in art. Whatever it may be, there may be kind of this rebellion of, no, I'm not Susie, I'm Jane, or whatever it may be. So we can see from this perspective that the environment we're raised in, the family we're raised in, and how other people treat us can impact us and influence of how our personality is going to be as we grow up. And again, the psychodynamic. So our past is going to influence the present. So finally, social roles and social expectations is definitely going to impact our sense of self and our personality. Okay, so with this, what we're going to see is that from this component, the Adlerians feel that personality becomes kind of fixated when people aren't aware of their lifestyle goals. So there's like this weird feedback loop. And again, this is going to be seen in the cognitive behavioral social learning theories, as we'll cover in module 6. This is like the foundation for this. So what happens a lot of times, if we're in the same social milieu, our lifestyle is going to be maintained through a constant feedback loop of the environment, so other people, the perception, and how we view the world. So we're going to have our behaviors, we're going to have our thoughts, and that's going to be reinforced by the environment. So from an Adlerian view, what we need to do is we somehow need to foster some sort of change to allow the lifestyle to be modified. So we can change these two factors. So we can change the environment, or we can change the perception. So we can have someone go to a new location, interact with new people socially, and that can change their lifestyle behaviors. Or we can also address the attitude, the private logic. But for best results, Adlerians argue that we want environmental change as well as perception change to promote growth and personality change. So if we go the reverse of this, if we're always staying in the same social milieus, doing the same things on a daily basis, never really changing or reflecting upon our thoughts, we're going to be the same person. So, but if we add novelty to our lives, that's how personality can grow and develop. So here's an activity that we'll do real quickly. So without thinking about it, you're going to pick an animal. So trust your gut. What animal sticks out for you? So you're going to pick the animal you identify with the most. We have a chameleon, a lion, an eagle, and a turtle. So which one sticks out to you the most? So with that, we're going to, excuse me, that real quick is a neo-Adlerian assessment. So you pick something very quickly because we don't want to overthink it. We want an unconscious answer. And ideally what this is supposed to address, and there's a lot of debate on this, this is more of a fun parlor, party game than rather a heavy personality assessment. But from this model, everything is purposeful. So whatever animal you picked could be a reflection of who you are. And this comes from, again, the neo-Adlerians, the 4 personality priorities. So in times of conflict and stress, people are typically going to express a personality priority to deal with the uncomfortableness. So the 4 types are controlling, pleasing, superiority, and comfort. So again, remember what animal you picked, and now we're going to cover them. So for lions from this model, again, always take this stuff with a grain of salt. Lions from this model are seen as striving for control. And so they get a lot of comfort in having control in their lives. Control reduces the anxiety. So they're striving for control of the situation, the self, or others. So that's going to be their motivation in times of stress. They're more comfortable in striving for control. And so that's what they're going to be going to. When they're feeling control, they're going to feel motivated. They'll probably be leadership oriented, definitely be goal oriented, and they're good at following as well as providing orders. So very, what do we have to do at this task, and let's get it done. What can we control and what can we do? So what happens though, if the stress level is starting to increase and they're striving more and more for control, and they start not to feel like they have control, we're going to see this tension arise. So they may feel that there's resistance in the social milieu they're in. They may feel that their power is being challenged, and they may feel frustrated and angry that they can't control the situation. So in those elements where they start to feel less control, we're going to see the compensating behaviors coming into play. And what this could look like is rigidity. Listen, it's my way or the highway. Or we can also see a social disconnection. Like, screw it, I'm going to do it myself. If no one else is going to do it right, then I'm just going to do it myself, kind of thinking. Again, that compensating behavior is kind of striving for control. Underneath all of this, the psychodynamics that are playing out, why a lion is striving for control, is underneath this, the lion is fearful of the unknown. Because the unknown, you can't control it. So when you can only control what you know. And the unknown is terrifying for someone who identifies from the lion perspective. It's terrifying. And there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of disorder, and that can promote a lot of anxiety. So that's the fear. And by having the unknown, we're going to compensate for rigid, putting things in a box, making things controllable. In addition to that, there's an ego component of the lion. Is typically someone who feels very confident in themselves, has a lot of control over their self, maybe has control over others, and there's a fear that they may be humiliated or look weak to others, because deep down, again, from these perspectives, that striving for control, that striving for self-mastery, underneath that was there's possibly feelings of feeling weak or worried that others are going to perceive them as weak. So the worry that others are going to perceive them as weak, again, that's an example of private logic. So if we go to the next one, the lion and the ego are going to have similarities. So the lion, again, that's striving for control in the situation. The ego, rather than focusing really on the environmental control, they're going to be more focused on themselves. So typically egos are striving, excuse me, let me just take a sip. Egos are striving to improve themselves or to outdo others through competition, and are really motivated by achieving goals. So a lot of kind of a very achieving oriented, likes competition, always likes to strive and improve themselves. They get some benefits from that. So we call that superiority, and we'll talk about this later. What I want to make a quick distinction is don't equate this necessarily with a superiority complex. This is just a priority, and we can have priorities that lead to complexes. So just because someone identifies as an ego doesn't equate that they're going to develop a superiority complex. But anyone can as well. as we'll talk about too. So just make a quick distinction, even though I'm using similar terms. So when feeling superior, again, going to show confidence. They're going to be knowledge seeking. They're going to have high standards for self and others. Very big go getter, very, almost perfectionist like, achieves a lot of things. When not feeling superior, they're going to feel critical, inferior, guilty, and may spiral into questioning everything. So what happens, we have eagles soar. They're up in the air when they're doing well, they're feeling great, they're confident. That's if there's any kernel of doubt, eagles drop very quickly. And you can see this a lot in groups where they go from feeling really confident to quickly criticizing themselves, go from feeling superior to inferior, and they may spiral very quickly into an existential crisis because their sense of identity, their worldview, their attitude of self is connected to achievement. So if they can't achieve, then they start questioning who they are. What's the point? If I can't be good at this, what's the point of trying? And so that can be difficult. There's any element of not being the best or meeting these high standards, there may be a huge existential crisis that occurs. So, what can happen for this, the overcompensating behavior in those moments, is going to quickly try to show that they're capable of doing things. So that could turn into saying yes to everything. And that's going to result in being overburdened, over involved, and have too much responsibility. So underneath all of this, there, when someone that is developing or showing these elements of that high achievement, the high perfectionism, underneath that is feelings most likely coming from either childhood experiences or other important experiences of development of feeling unimportant. And how they overcome those feelings of unimportantness is by achieving. Their sense of identity, their sense of well being comes from their achievements rather than just being as a person. And when we get into the humanistic theories, that is going to be seen this idea of the ideal self versus the real self. So rather than feeling comfortable with who they are, their identity is outside in the achievements. So if they can't achieve, they're going to feel unimportant. There's also a feeling that life is meaningless. Numerous times in my own clinical practice, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, is talking with high achievers. There may be a point in their life where they have done all of this accomplishments, but they're still feeling empty. They have been so externally focused that they have not been internally focused, and they may not know who they are because, again, their identity is all stemming from what they've accomplished. They may not know who they are, and there may be a sense of meaninglessness and feeling of inadequacy. So, if we go to the next one, this is the chameleon, the pleasing priority type. So chameleons are probably some of the most comfortable people we want to work with groups because they like to please others, and they're very good at changing who they are depending on the situation. So like we have chameleons that can use camouflage, so they're pleasing others and they can change themselves to help the group dynamics. So when they're in that state of pleasing others, they're going to be friendly, non-aggressive, they compromise, they volunteer self, they play the roles others expect them to play. Lions and eagles love chameleons. The lions love chameleons because they can give them orders, control, and they'll be good followers. Eagles love chameleons because chameleons are going to stroke the eagle's ego. So the chameleon is going to tell how great and superior the eagle is, and that's going to make the eagle feel fantastic. But this all can fall apart when the chameleon starts to feel overburdened or overstressed. So when they're no longer feeling pleasing, they may feel learned helplessness. Essentially, we're covering this more in the cognitive behavioral theories in module 6, but learned helplessness essentially, no matter what I do, it's not going to work, so why try? We can also have chameleons who lose their identity, loss of self identity crisis, because they're constantly trying to change themselves to please others, they may not know who they are. They may have many different personas, many different masks, but they get confused who they are. There can be despair, especially when they cannot meet the demands of others. They're very person oriented, and behind that, well, we'll get that in the future, but behind that could be because they themselves may feel inferior. So, in overcompensating their inferior feelings is to make others feel superior. So, when chameleons are feeling very overstressed, what we're going to see is different types of behaviors depending on the situation. Because again, chameleons are good at expressing and developing different types of self depending on the context. They could be passive aggressive, they could be ultra conforming, where they lose their sense of self completely. They could be exaggerating roles. And what I mean by that, they could be trying to do the best because that's what other people expect of them. Or it could be in a way of like a passive aggressive of like, all right, you want me to be the best follower. God damn it, I'll be the best follower there is, or whatever it may be. There may be an exaggeration of this. And there'll be an incongruence. Again, the ideal self over the real self, just like with the ego. So underneath all this, why a chameleon is very people pleasing is it is the fear of rejection. And so when they're in a group setting and they feel that there's a possibility they're going to reject, they're going to compensate in some capacity to make that not this way. So the chameleon, if we go back to psychoanalysis, this is going to be that person that pursues possibly. I'm worried of rejection, so I'm going to buy flowers. I'm going to give you a massage. I'm going to treat you very well. But if that doesn't seem to work, then that passive aggressiveness or that exaggerating roles or even that possible withdrawal may come into play. So behind all this is a feeling or fear of being rejected as a person. All right, the final one. So as I mentioned, what we're going to see is turtle, or excuse me, let me start off with the turtle first. So turtle is a unique one compared to the other three because the other three tend to really work together. But with the turtle, they their whole motivation in life is to seek comfort. So personal comfort. So when feeling comfort, turtles are going to be easygoing. They're going to have few demands. They're going to mind their own business. Their motto is to each their own. They're going to be mellow and laid back because they're comfortable, cool, everything's going well. But what happens in times of stress? And probably turtles have a low stress threshold than the other three we talked about. But when times of stress, if they start to lose their feeling of comfort, they're going to get irritated, annoyed, bored, loss of interest, shut down, keep to themselves, and it's going to get stuck or fantasize about going back to comfort. So I am absolutely a turtle, 100%. And so in times of stress, what you'll see if you're working in groups and turtles, again, they're rather laid back, they kind of go with the flow. But how you can tell when a turtle is possibly feeling too overwhelmed is this withdrawal, loss of interest, no longer talking in meetings, annoyed, bored, just checked out. And and what I notice too when I get extremely stressed, that I have fantasies of going on an island somewhere with no cell phone, no TV, no internet, and just like completely removing myself and just laying on a beach somewhere or living in a cabin in the woods. So that's that fantasy of going back to comfort, being very comfort focused. So what we're going to see in this time is the turtle is going to be very self-interest and not really care about other people's needs, other people's needs in those situations. They're more focused on themselves. So what we can see with the compensating behavior that happens in these group dynamics, reduced productivity, compulsive hedonistic behavior, again, seeking comfort, pleasure. So maybe, eating comfort food, focusing more on pleasure. The id really takes over for a turtle. They're going to beat to their own drum. They're going to remove themselves from stress, withdrawal, and wander, and will be seen from others as not using their talents and not living up to potential. So the turtle is the opposite to the chameleon for both the eagle and lion. So in other ways to say that, the eagle and lion love the chameleon. The eagle and lion hate the turtle because the turtle is going to beat to their own drums, and they're not going to be seen as meeting their potential, and they're going to be seen as lazy. So we see this quite a bit in school or school setting. And Adlerian theory is still used quite a bit in school settings. That when students are seen as not being productive or not meeting the standards, then we could just label them as lazy. But what it could be is that they're not being challenged, like we hear that narrative quite a bit, or they just don't feel comfortable and they're looking for comfort. And so that's just a different perspective we can get at as well. So underneath all of this, what the turtle is fearful of is chronic stress. So they're fearful of being responsible for others, as well as having to live up to expectations from others. So even though the turtle seems like they don't care, that is to overcompensate that they do. They do care. They're actually fearful, possibly, of expectations. They typically don't have a lot of expectations from themselves, besides that comfort piece, but really expectations from others and letting other people down is what kind of can terrify them. And responsibility can terrify them too. And stress level as well. So what you'll see a lot of times in this dynamic is lions, eagles, and chameleons are going to make this triangle, and turtles are going to kind of do their own thing. They'll let those other three groups work together, and the turtle will pair up with other turtles and kind of bask in the sun. So that's kind of the summary of this. It may or may not fit for you, but the thing to really take away from this is a lot of our behaviors may be stemming from possible fears or anxieties, and we're going to overcompensate them depending what's going on. Okay, so related to this is if we get to a pattern of useless behavior in trying to strive our goals, because those typically are social disruptive, useless behavior, social disruptive, is we can develop a superiority or some sort of complex. So complex is essentially, can have many different terms in psychodynamics, but how the Adlerians are using it, it is like a blueprint of behavior. You're stuck in a rigid way of behaving. And it connects not only with your thoughts of yourself, but also your behaviors and how you interact with others. So how you perceive things is also going to impact how you behave. And when it's very rigid, you can develop a complex. So there's three elements of a complex from Adlerian view. And it's rather simple compared to, there are multiple complexes from a Freudian as well as Jungian, but Adlerians keep things rather simple. So we'll have So what we'll see, we'll have an inferiority complex, a superiority complex, and then the striving for social interest. So as we look at this graph, an inferiority complex, essentially, sense of self is lower than how they see others. So this could be the chameleon possibly. So my sense of self is going to be here, others are going to be here. A lot of people in the helping profession kind of have this dynamic where we want to help others, but a lot of times we don't help ourselves. And that could lead to inferiority complex. The superiority complex is the opposite. Higher sense of self, lower than others, right? And so they see themselves above others, see them rather superior to others, and others are below them. What we're striving for in life and to live a more functional and healthy lifestyle is the social interest of having me equate with others, right? This is also secure attachment. So sense of self is equal to how we see each other. So how do these develop? Well, one way that's used a lot in the clinical realm is an assessment of inferiority complexes. And so traditionally, this was used because, again, we're trying to understand the private logic. We're trying to understand how one views themselves. So the assessment that Adlerians use is they identify by filling in these different blanks. So like a word association in a way. I am blank, the world is blank, others sees me as blank, therefore I must. So depending on how one answers this could connects to how one interacts with their environment. So an example of inferiority complex would be I am weak, the world is scary and dangerous, others see me as weak and an easy target, therefore I must protect myself at all costs. So think about that. What are some possible behaviors and activities do you think this person would engage in with having this perception of themselves and the world? What groups do you think they will associate with? So, what this specifically comes from in the literature is an example of someone growing up who felt weak, scared, felt weak, that the world was dangerous to them. They were being bullied and picked upon, so they felt like in order to overcome that, they had to protect themselves at all costs. So, from this example from the literature, this individual got a lot into karate and developed a more positive sense of self because we had interactions in the karate school. We had social connection. We also had a sense of mastery of the karate techniques, especially as someone went along. And so then their worldview starts to change that they feel like they can protect themselves, which could make them feel less weak, feel less of an easy target, and the world is less scary and dangerous because they have that sense of protection. So superiority complex. This is going to be an extreme example of a superiority complex, but again, this comes from the literature. This is without providing names, this comes from someone who engaged in horrendous mass shootings. So an extreme example of superiority complex is someone, I am a god, others don't see how amazing I am, but they will. The world is full of stupid people who need to be punished, therefore I will punish them. So typically a superiority complex, and this is an extreme case of that others do not understand how grand or magnificent they really are. A lot of ego, a lot of narcissism possibly. But the thing to remember, just because one may have a superiority complex does not equate that they're a sociopath or going to be violent for others. Individuals who are that way can definitely have a superiority complex, but just because one has that does not equate to being a deviant, violent individual. So, but what we can see, and again, the last 10 years have really shown this on the internet and the growth of hate groups is we can find superiority complexes in individuals who engage in extreme deviance. So this could be white supremacy groups, how they believe they're superior to others. So what's interesting though from this model, again, as we already talked about with the personality priorities, there's always something underneath this that led to these behaviors of being developed. So the kicker with superiority complex is they are built off of feelings of being inferior. They started off as inferior feelings. And so in this situation, typically this person has much pain, does not see themselves in a positive light, feel they have little control of their life, and have poor sense of self. So they start off feeling that something needs to change. And what may start to happen is, depending on the social groups they're exposed to, is there can be the sense of superiority that may come into play. So what can happen is they develop the superiority feelings to overcompensate for ways they feel. So again, if we go back to the internet, which can have numerous groups that are focusing on people who are feeling disconnected, feeling down on themselves, feeling a very low sense of self or lack of meaning, and provide that meaning. So this could be by joining groups online or in person or whatever it may be. So again, these are extreme examples, but when we study cults and hate groups, they know this rather well. They typically target individuals who are not in the best, they're not in the best, how do I want to say this? They typically target individuals who are already feeling disconnected, lack of meaning, not really sure they are, and may already be having feelings of inferiority. So a lot of times the recruitment is done by promising some sort of can't talk, some sort of cure, salvation, or real truth to how the world works. And again, when you study a lot of these hate groups, that's how it is. So a lot of the messages, hey, you may be feeling inferior, but that's because of this group is keeping you down. And they're keeping you down because the reality is you're this super, great ubermensch mega person, but they're trying to keep you down. And let me give you this truth, take this quote unquote pill, and boom, you're going to be better. And this is how these dynamics change. No doubt that can feel positive feelings at first. And then this individual is going to want to seek more of those positive feelings, more of those superior feelings. Next thing you know, all the information they're consuming is this kind of negative, superior, component. So what happens is at first, feeling superior is going to feel good, but the high is going to go away. And so therefore, the individual is going to continue engaging in thoughts and behaviors that make them feel superior to others. So what happens is we can kind of lose our sense of awareness. Our worldview is going to be changed because we're only focusing on one narrative at a time. And this could lead to a lot of group conformity, escalating behaviors. I mean, there are numerous examples in the last 10 years and even before that explains this. But essentially, the thing to remember when we're dealing with someone who may be presenting a superiority complex, underneath that stems from them feeling inferior. And so they overcompensated those inferior feelings by boosting themselves up. And if we look at the other way, someone is overcompensating by inferiority feelings, typically by helping others. And so the superiority complex typically is more focused on helping themselves. Inferiority complex is more focusing on helping of others. So that's where this idea of social interest comes in. We want to have a balance. Again, I know I've said balance multiple times in this module, but that's the key. Balance between helping ourselves and helping others, okay? So Adler felt life is difficult. So because of this difficulty, we are prone to possibly developing one of the complexes, either feeling inferior or feeling superior. In addition, the Adlerians believe a lot of violence and cruelty of this world was the result of individuals seeing others as lower than them, the superiority complex. And we see this time and time again, that a lot of times in acts of violence, the victims are dehumanized by the assailant. So with that, because again, Adler really was influenced by a lot of social theories of the 20th century. And so he felt that one way to increase social interest, or excuse me, the goal in life was to have this social interest. And there's many different definitions of social interest, but essentially, here's the essential components. So we want someone to feel a sense of belonging to communities, and communities plural, not just one. And we want also, because the striving for social interest is feeling a sense of kinship to humanity as a whole and understanding my internal world and all the complexity of me, also other people has it as well. And we have all these connections as a human race. So individuals are going to treat others humans with a sense of respect and equality. So that's going to help decrease superiority feelings because we're having an equal plane. In addition to that, individuals are going to treat themselves with a sense of respect and equality. So that's going to help someone get out of the inferiority element. So again, the idea is want to help myself, want to help others. And that's going to kind of equate this equality with this. And so they're going to promote and engage in behaviors of respect to themselves and others. So that's the goal, and that's what it will look like when we reach the outcome. But then the question is, well, how do we do this? So one suggestion in the Adlerian framework is that we want to belong to multiple groups. And we want to belong to groups that see individuals as a whole rather than certain parts. And this can be hard. And so, therefore, having more groups associated with us or belonging to us can provide a sense of connection, as well as having different worldviews. And having different worldviews is going to allow more flexibility and options in useful behavior rather than useless. Because useless behavior typically occurs when we don't have many options or we have a very narrow worldview. So if we want to increase our social support, increase our variations of how to accomplish different goals, that's going to allow more flexibility and more balance. So we don't want to ever forget we're social beings and that we're greatly influenced by groups. Therefore, having a variety in what groups we're affiliated with is going to prevent rigid identities from being formed. So again, that's similar to individuation from a Jungian standpoint, and it's going to be seen similar to self-actualization from a humanistic standpoint. So to add the existential element to this is we can find a lot of meaning and purpose by engaging in behaviors that transcend and go beyond themselves. So that could be, the transpersonal domain from a Jungian perspective, could be engaging in altruistic mature defenses from a psychoanalytic perspective. Essentially, when we do things for others that go beyond ourselves, maybe even environmentally, like taking environmental interest and promoting still this growth and change from a cultural standpoint, this can not only make us feel good from helping others, but also promotes and kind of helps others grow and develop as well. So we can do this by volunteering, we can teach others, we can build things for others, we can cook for others. So that's the big element of individual psychology, is helping or interacting with others. So doing something for others that provides some sort of accomplishment and meaning. And this can greatly decrease a sense of inferiority because we're feeling good of what we're doing, of what we've mastered, of what we accomplished, and can decrease superiority because, again, our focus is on helping others. And if we're genuinely wanting to help others, we hopefully are not seeing us as being better than them. And then there's some people who do help others who have those motivations behind that. But again, that's really the snapshot. And so the big thing is having multiple different interactions with different groups, having opportunities to volunteer, help, and give back to others, as well as being open to receive help from others as well. So that's really the concept of social interest. Okay. Just going to take a breather real quick. Whew, a lot of information. So to sum up real quickly, individual psychology is essentially very focused on how our social milieu is going to impact our sense of self, and how our own thoughts and perceptions is going to impact how we interact with the world. So we always want to increase awareness of what we do and understand that a lot of our behaviors is stemming from either overcompensation or striving to achieve some sort of life goal. So thank you with all this. Let me stop sharing. We covered a lot. And again, to reiterate, I don't expect you to master all of this. This is more, all this information is provided for you to cherry pick, to utilize for your kind of using your own psychological profile, analyzing a fictional character. And you can use these different frameworks to help make sense. So in closing, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. So I'm going to end the video here.